The reason I'm so protective of him is because he has special needs. He's on the autistic spectrum.
But it is gonna bother you because you're human, and I was human. I am human, still.
I'm actually making history tonight as the first person with Asperger's to host SNL.
Authorized autism. That's what I have. Evangelical, evangelist, evangelize, evaporated by...
I used to work at a restaurant called Grazie Ristorante. One day I was working a shift and I was talking to one of my friends, and I asked him, "Do you think that Steve Jobs is autistic?" And then he said something unexpected to me. He said, "Well, he's not autistic like you or I am." And I said to myself, "Like I am?" My friend told me that I was autistic, and I'd never heard this before. So over the course of the next month, I spent tons and tons of time researching and looking up and seeing what makes a person autistic. And it turns out I am. Now, if this comes as a shock to you that I'm autistic, it's just because you don't really know what autism is. And at one point, I didn't even know those things, and I just wanted to make a video just explaining it to anybody who is out there who's interested in watching. So there are actually a lot of famous people and celebrities that you may not even realize are on the autistic spectrum, and I'm going to get to that a little later in the video, but first I just want to cover what autism is and how you can understand it better. So I was trying to think about how people who've never actually understood what autism is would perceive it, and the big thing that came in my head was the movie Rain Man, starring Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. They play two brothers, and the Dustin Hoffman character is the Rain Man, or the autistic person who has just this crippling autism where they can barely even speak, but they're very, very good at like counting toothpicks on the floor or counting cards in blackjack. And that's a lot of the ways that people perceive what autism is just based on that one Hollywood movie. But there's so many other traits and just different things about it that just people don't understand, people don't know. So I'd like to start just by telling you my story and my experience, and maybe you can relate to it in some way. When I was a kid and went to school, I didn't have any friends. And I never thought this as a weird thing. I just didn't have friends. I didn't talk to people. I didn't do anything with anybody. When everybody went outside for recess to play, lots of kids would get into groups and play with each other, and I wouldn't. I would always just play by myself and do stuff by myself and just think to myself about stuff, and I would never actually play with other kids. Now, at the time, I didn't think it was a weird thing. That was just kind of who I was. But if you look back at it, this is actually one of the first and big signs of having autism and being autistic, is you tend to prefer the company of yourself to others. And if you do it like the company of others, it's usually one-on-ones as opposed to big groups. So all throughout my elementary school and all throughout most of high school, up until maybe the last year, I had literally zero friends. I would go to the cafeteria and eat food by myself. If I had a break or recess, I would just spend it by myself. And any interactions I actually had with people was very minor, and it's just because I had kind of an anxiety that kind of comes with having autism and just with talking with people about anything. And especially when you're talking with people and you make mistakes, it sticks in the mind of an autistic person even more, and it makes them more anxious and harder for them to talk to people in the future because they're afraid they're going to make more mistakes and just say things that are not what a normal person would say. Autistic people tend to laugh uncontrollably, by the way, if you've ever seen a video of mine.
What a story, Mark.
So first off, autism or Asperger's or being autistic is not something you have or don't. It's very much a spectrum of different traits and just the way people are. The actual term is Asperger's or ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. So it really is a spectrum of traits and just the way people are, and it's not really something you are or aren't. There's varying levels of what autism is. So I would be classified as a high functioning autism where it doesn't affect me in a crippling way. There are some people who are autistic who are just very, very, very autistic. They get sensory overload with certain things and they can't even talk for a lot of different ways. So one of the signs of being autistic is liking predictability and routine. People with autism very much so just like to do kind of the same things that they always do because it's very comforting to them. And if something messes up with their routine or they're forced to think fast on their feet, when they're trying to focus on some new task, they have to spend extra mental energy energy to get themselves in the place where they can actually cope with it. Routine and just doing the same things day in and day out is an easier way for a person with autism to cope with the world. People on the autistic spectrum also tend to have trouble with tonation and understanding how people are talking. So if you say something jokingly and sarcastically to an autistic person, they might not understand that you are joking and being sarcastic, and they might take your joke very seriously and become very offended by it just because that they don't understand that you're joking. I do this myself a lot of times, and I sometimes have to catch myself and stop myself from overreacting just because I will get upset at a person because I didn't fully understand what they actually meant when the way that they were saying something was actually in a different manner. People on the autistic spectrum also tend to bottle up emotions, so they look very unempathetic or sympathetic when bad things happen to other people, when really they are feeling that to some extent on the inside. And then after long periods of time where they're bottling up emotions and emotions and emotions, they just tend to explode, often in tears, just because they're holding everything inside, and then one day it just tends to pop out. Just recently, one of my cousins had to go to the hospital because they had a liver failure, and my wife Sylvia told me that I didn't look too concerned that she was in the hospital, when I actually was concerned. I don't show it on the outside. It's hard for somebody with autism to express their emotions sometimes. They just seem to keep everything inside, but in reality, in my head, I do. It's just because I have autism, I have a hard time expressing it sometimes. People with autism also tend to dress in very bright colors. If you've ever seen one of my videos, I'm always wearing a bright orange shirt. That's just because I like the color orange, and I found out recently that this is actually something that lots of people with autism do. They tend to dress in very bright colors so that everybody can see how brightly they're dressed. Also, some people with autism will do the opposite, and instead of dressing in bright colors, they will dress in very, very, very dark colors, only black sometimes, just because they are very focused on dressing one way or the other, either very, very brightly or very, very dark clothing. People on the autistic spectrum also tend to think more abstractly. I remember when I was a kid and there were two couples. One couple had somebody who was overweight and thin, and another couple who had somebody who was overweight and thin. And in my mind, it made sense that the two couples should switch. The two people who are overweight should be together, and the two people that were thinner should be together. And just that's kind of the way that people with autism think. They think very abstractly. Obviously, that's a stupid thing to think or say, and I didn't know it was a stupid thing to think or say at the time. I realize it now. But that's just the way that people with autism think sometimes. They think very, very abstractly. They tend to think in numbers and patterns and strategy and just different ways that somebody without autism would never even think about. A lot of people on the autistic spectrum tend to be very eccentric or quirky, or just have different things that normal people would never say or do, just because they have a different way of thinking. People with autism also tend to think to themselves as always feeling different, feeling like they're somebody else apart from the rest of the group that everybody else seems to click into. People in autism will never find cliques of people to hang out in high school unless it's probably with other people with autism. Those other people with autism, they will be able to understand more, and that's the only real clique that a person with autism can really fit into most of the time. Like, I could be wrong about this. Maybe you have autism and you find it very easy to be friends with people who don't have autism. But me personally, that's the way that I've always felt. I've always felt different. I've always felt eccentric and quirky in certain ways, just the way that I think and the way that I do things. And I realize this doesn't affect everybody with autism, but this is just the way that I feel about it. Like I said before, people with autism are very much loners. They like to spend a lot of time by themselves. And if they do have interactions with people, they really do prefer one-on-ones. Big groups of people or parties is just very anxious because they have to understand the way that people are thinking and simultaneously in so many different ways. And they also have to make eye contact with so many different people, which people with autism are bad at making eye contact. It's a hard thing to do when you're in big groups of people and you have this social anxiety and you're constantly thinking that you're going to say something stupid. And when you're in big groups of people and you say something stupid, you really feel that. You really feel the shame of saying something stupid. And it really really stops you from saying anything in big groups in the future just because you're kind of scared a lot of the time. Most people with autism also tend to be males. About 80% of diagnosed people with autism are men or boys. I'm not trying to be sexist in any way. This just seems to be factual. Men are 4 times more likely to be on the autistic spectrum than women. There's also like tons of other lists of things that people with autism do. I'm not going to get into every single one. These are just general things that affected me personally and that I wanted to share. So if you take anything away from this video, there are 3 main factors that you can tell to see if somebody has autism or not. The first one is social deficit of communication. People with autism tend to not really understand how normal people talk, and they just kind of talk the way that they think they should talk. And because they talk in a different way, they're always considered really weird or outcast or eccentric or just funny talking person. People with autism will use words that people don't really use a lot of the time. Sometimes they'll use big words that they like to use, but it's not something that a normal person would do. This is also one of the main ways that children are diagnosed with autism, having a social deficit in communication, where they just don't seem to play with other kids as other kids play with each other. The second big thing that people with autism tend to have is they tend to be loners. They tend to like to spend time by themselves, and if they do spend time with people, it's one-on-ones. It's not that they don't like spending time with people, it's just they don't have a lot of people that they feel safe talking to. And people with autism really like to spend time with certain people who understand them and make them feel safe to talk to. And the third and final big way you can tell that if you are autistic or somebody you know is autistic is there's a saying in autism, it's that normal people have hobbies and people with autism have obsessions. What do I mean by this? So me personally, in my 20s, I went through a bunch of different obsessions. Just I found a topic of something that I liked, and all I did all day, every day, was think about this topic. This depends on whatever I was being obsessive at the time. When I was a kid, I had an obsession with video games. I just love playing video games. Now, lots of kids nowadays play video games, but when I tell you I was obsessed with playing video games, I was obsessed. All I did every day was after school, come home, play nothing but video games, and then I would go to school and just wait to come home to play video games. Now, this doesn't mean that if you like to play video games a lot, it means you're autistic. It just means that this is one of the obsessions that I've had in my life, and I've switched from obsession to obsession throughout my life. I also spent a couple years in my 20s being obsessed with languages. I would just study languages and try to learn them, and I actually got to pretty decent levels of speaking different languages at one point. Tanti anni fa ho cominciato a parlare in italiano e adesso posso parlare con te se vuoi parlare con me. Je peux parler un peu de français aussi. Je dois apprendre beaucoup de choses parce que mon français n'est pas bon. Y puedo hablar en español un poquito porque español es muy similares de italiano. My French and my Spanish are honestly not as good. I didn't spend as much time learning them, but it became one of my obsessions, one of my things that I like to do more than anything else. And for a couple of years, it consumed me, and that's just all I wanted to do or talk about or just anything in my life was about languages. Now, you may not think that you know anybody who's autistic, but there are tons and tons of famous people that have autism. The first 2 big examples to think about would be Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Both of these men have come out and said that they are on the autistic spectrum in some way or another. And most people think it would be a bad thing, but I'm here to tell you that they would not be the successful, super wealthy people that they are if they didn't have autism. When I tell you that people with autism have obsessions, this is what obsession looks like. When Mark Zuckerberg is obsessed with making a social media platform, it becomes Facebook. Elon Musk, the wealthiest man in the world, would not be who he is if he were not autistic. Other extremely wealthy and famous people over the years, like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, all of these people have autism in some way or another. Jeff Bezos, the famous Amazon guy, if you've ever seen any interview with him, especially early on in the 90s when Amazon was first coming out, he seems very quirky and eccentric, and he also has this laugh that just comes out all the time.
What a story, Mark.
This laugh is part of what having autism is. It's an uncontrollable nervous laugh because you don't really know what to say or do in the time, so you just laugh. Dan Aykroyd had this obsession with the paranormal, which is what made him write Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters would not exist if Dan Aykroyd did not have autism because he was obsessed with the paranormal. Jerry Seinfeld, the famous comedian from the show Seinfeld, in interviews he says he used to write a joke a day, and he has pages and pages and pages, just hundreds, thousands of pages of jokes that he's written over his entire lifetime, just because that's what autism is. You have obsessions about things and you don't really know what to do anything else except the thing that you're obsessed about. Magnus Carlsen, the best chess player in the world, is most definitely on the autistic spectrum.
And that was the difference between me and the other kids, is that they would go to chess practice, they would maybe even do their homework, but they weren't living and breathing sort of the game that in the way that I was. Like, I think about it all the time. Like, I'm thinking about the game while I'm sitting on this chair. Like, I'm still analyzing a game that I played today. Like, it never goes completely out of my mind.
Satoshi Tajiri, the inventor of Pokemon, had an obsession with bugs as a kid. He was only able to create Pokemon, one of the best-selling franchises of all time, because he has autism. Even famous people from history like Einstein and Newton, like, I'm very, very sure that these people would be on the autistic spectrum as well. Albert Einstein famously didn't start speaking till he was 4 years old, and this is also another way that kids are diagnosed early on with autism, as they have delayed speech. While most people start speaking by the time they're 2, Einstein didn't speak till he was 4. And the last people I'm going to talk about who have autism are different YouTubers. Mark Rober, one of the biggest YouTube stars in the entire world, made an entire video about his son who has a higher level of autism, where his son is actually can't do a lot of things that normal kids do. But I'm here to tell you that Mark Rober himself is on the autistic spectrum. There's another big Minecraft YouTuber named Dream, who I am very convinced is on the autistic spectrum. There's an interview that Dream does with Colin and Samir, and he just describes his childhood as being very lonesome and just reads a lot of books.
I used to read 100 books a year from when I was like 14 to 18, and there was a couple years there where I read almost a book every other day. And that was like my passion. I was tanking in my school because I would just be in math class reading or writing in my journals or whatever.
And the final person who has autism, who you may not even know has autism, is MrBeast. And when I tell you that MrBeast has autism, before watching this video, you may not have realized that he has autism, but I hope after everything I've said that you realize it is quite obvious that MrBeast is autistic. He describes his childhood as being a loner who just doesn't want to do anything. As a very young kid, he's played a lot of Lego. His mother talks about how he didn't want to do anything except play Lego. And when he was 11 years old, he started making YouTube videos, and he just became obsessed with making YouTube videos.
That was the biggest problem, is I thought it was a freak of nature, because like people would tell me all you do is talk about YouTube, you're too obsessed with YouTube, like get a life. Like from 13 to like 19, I never met anyone who cared about YouTube, like not even an ounce. And so I was so untalkative. People thought like there was problems with me because I just wouldn't talk to anyone, because all I would do is talk about YouTube. And after a while, like you realize like no one cares. Like you just get labeled as the guy that just only likes YouTube. And so I kind of just like didn't talk at all.
There's an article about MrBeast in the Rolling Stone magazine on April 19th, 2022, where it's actually mentioned that he has autism. There's also a video that MrBeast did years ago where he read every word in the dictionary. And when he came to the word autism, he said,
Autism, that's what I have.
MrBeast also has Crohn's disease, which people on the autistic spectrum seem to have Crohn's disease a much higher percentage than the regular population. So MrBeast having Crohn's disease is also partially because he has autism. Now, it was never my intent to expose any person in this video and tell you that they have autism. The whole purpose of this video is just for me to express myself and just get it out there and just tell people that I have autism and I'm not really ashamed of it, that I think autism can be a great thing in so many ways. I'm also not trying to compare my autism with other people's autism. I understand that there's some people who do have crippling autism where they can't communicate or speak at all. And I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for these people. Part of the reason I'm making this video also is because I have a son and he is a little over 2 years old now, and he has delayed speech where he's not really talking as early as normal kids talk. And I'm pretty sure he will be on the autistic spectrum too. And I really want this video to be something that he can watch later in life and just be inspired by, and just see all the things that people with autism have done over the years. And I'd want anybody out there who has autism to know that if I just wanted to tell you that if you have autism, that you are not alone, and you can do great things if you want to. Thanks for watching.